Welcome, everybody. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us for this online dissemination event of the UNTWIST research team. We're really glad that you're here today. We've been very excited to meet stakeholders, to meet colleagues, to meet people who are equally interested in dimensions of gender and political participation. The event today has the title Untwisting Gender Representation Insights for Democratic Renewal. These are big words, and we have a lot of interesting discussions coming up in this session. My name is Laura. I'll be guiding us through this session. We have an entire team here excited to engage in discussions and dialogue. Let's first get an overview of what the plan is for this session. And I'll be moderating us through a set of slides. If you experience any issues with this Zoom, feel free to contact me directly. You should have received, hopefully, my email and my phone number in the registration email. Let's have a look what we have planned to do with us here in the next 2 hours. Now, this is a dissemination event where we would like to share some of our research findings and the logic of our research, but also, most importantly, hear from our stakeholders what our research might mean, which other directions we could go into. So with this in mind, we have planned our session now in 2 parts. The first one really to set the scene, to get an overview of what kind of aspects of gender and right-wing populist votes we have discussed. And to really start with the question, why do people vote for right-wing populist parties? Which is a phenomenon, of course, that we see across many electoral contexts. But it's, of course, also a question that keeps us up at night, and a question that has become more acute as we see political developments unfolding also in other parts of the world. To make sure that we can get you involved as well, we have a little quiz, a little poll coming up in a moment. In order then to move into the UNTWIST project in itself, the principal investigator, the lead in the project, Antonia Ruiz, will then come with a presentation outlining of what has motivated our research. Why are we doing this research? Followed by very brief presentations across some of the key work packages. Now, you might think, oh, scientists, they always have big words and, you know, a lot of technical terms. What we would like to share with you is really very brief presentations that provide a nutshell of what kind of questions, what kind of methods, what kind of data, and most importantly, what kind of implications come out of our research. So we hope that you will follow us through these different parts of the work. There will be opportunity to ask questions, and we will pick up on many of your concerns then later on. Before we go into the break, we want to start setting up relations and to actually enable us to really use this session for dialogue. So there will be a brief Meet the Scientist session where we can interact with stakeholders in breakout groups. At the same time, we're all aware that, you know, being in a Zoom room is exhausting as it is, and we're all probably still a little traumatized from Corona. So there will be a break in between. Afterwards, we come back to the question of, you know, we've done this research, what does it mean? So how do we get from research to action here? We start the second part with a wonderful visualization, stories of the political science research that we've done. And then the main part really of the session, the one that we've been really looking forward to, is to engage in a stakeholder dialogue where you can choose spaces, breakout groups, either speaking to the team of researchers in the country context that interests you, and that's the UK, Spain, Germany, Switzerland, Hungary, and Denmark. Or if you're more interested in the broader implications of, you know, Horizon Europe research project and the question of, you know, dissemination and citizen science, then you can stay and engage with the respective colleagues on that. Then afterwards, we will close with a sort of outlook and reflections and ways of staying in touch. So really, that's the program. Stay with us as long as you can. And we're hoping to have a really interactive session here. Before we go into a little introduction poll, as researchers, we're of course acutely aware of power relations, and these also pertain to online spaces. Just to give you an idea of what kind of space we are in here together, these are representations of the participant list. As you can see, we have academics and researchers. We have people coming from civil society organizations and NGOs. We do have people coming from a policy-making or political background, and then people who come from all sorts of areas. We do have a distribution covering all the countries that we look at, but also many other countries. And again, the gender dimensions of the far right and populist right-wing parties' vote is, of course, something that is shared widely. On the online navigation here, if you like, if you haven't done so already, feel free to add an affiliation or anything that kind of gives an idea of where you come from. After your name, for that, you simply go on your own video tile, click on the 3 dots, and go on rename. Should you experience during this call anything that might be uncomfortable or that you find problematic, write in the chat. You can also write to me privately using the private chat function. Send me an email. We're really trying to make this a participatory, comfortable space for exchanging ideas and to talk about, further actions. To this end, we will monitor the chat and attendee list. But at the same time, we really want to use the chat because we want to engage with each other and network. And for that, please also feel free to use the chat to add websites of your organization, links to publications, put in your SOMI handles because, we're also engaged public political scientists and sociologists. So really, let's make sure that we use this space to interact and not just have a one-way discussion. So, having said all of that, let's actually get going and talk a little bit about this core question that is really the starting point of our research. I'm going to start a little poll, and you're also welcome to use the QR code here. Let me just launch it. Why do people vote for right-wing populist parties? You should have on your screen a quiz popping up in which you have 3 questions that we have been discussing in the run-up, in the planning of our project, but also during our respective research stages. And we would invite you to just sort of put in what you think. And then in a couple of, in a minute or 2, it's a very short quiz, it's really only 3 questions. I will show you the results and we can maybe come back to the results in our discussions as we go along. I can see that people have filled in, and there's an interesting diversity in responses here that you might also find interesting, and that again, let's make sure that we circle back to this in the discussion. This is your last chance to fill in the quiz, because in a moment I'm going to end the poll, which is now, and you can see the results popping up. So the results that you see on your screen now, there are 3 questions. Who votes, who's most likely to vote for right-wing populist parties? There's some diversity here. And one of the questions that we, of course, have in the project, of course, is also, can this be explained also by national contexts? The second question is about the losers of globalization thesis, which we have dealt with in interesting ways in our research. It's quite foundational to the hypothesis, alternative hypothesis that we have formulated. But it's quite clear here that economic and cultural factors are what participants in the Zoom room think. And then what motivates them? You can also see the distinctive sort of answers that have been given here, raising the question of, how do we study all of this? I will stop the sharing here. Thank you for working with us on these this little quiz. It's always good to kind of get the discussion going. And I will now hand over to Antonia. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot for this introduction, Laura. Good morning to everyone. It is a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for taking the time to attend this session, and I hope we can make it engaging and interesting for you. My name is Antonia Ruiz, and I'm the scientific coordinator of the UNTWIST project. If you find our project or any of the presentation interesting, please spread the word to other parties and civil society organizations so they can get to know us. You're also welcome to come back to us with further questions to explore deeper and further our findings in ways that can inform your policies or objectives. So 9 different universities, foundations, and institutes across 6 European countries form the UNTWIST consortium. Spain, Germany, Denmark, Hungary, United Kingdom, and Switzerland. And I coordinated the project from Pablo de Olavide University in Seville, Spain. We have academic partners in each of the 6 countries who are responsible for producing and analyzing the data at the local level. And then, thanks to strong coordination that allow us to have data comparability across countries. Work packet leaders compile accurate documents combining common findings with particularities in each of the countries. Besides, we have 2 non-academic partners. One is helping us to visualize our data in ways which are accessible to stakeholders and the civil society in general, VIT, and the other an association specializing in citizen science practices, EXA. You will have the opportunity to meet team members and introduce your interests and concerns in this event after the presentations. So, what do we do in the UNTWIST project? Basically, we analyze the gender dimension in voting for right-wing populist parties with a twofold meaning. How does the anti-feminist discourses of right-wing populist parties affect voting behaviors, but also how does voters' gender affect their electoral behavior? And we are concerned here with the supply and the demand side. From the demand side, we focus on right-wing populist party voters, male and female, to try to understand their rationale for choosing these parties. We have run 18 focus groups and 1 representative survey in the 6 countries of the consortium. Among these voters, we have chosen to focus particularly in those who have previously voted for mainstream parties, try to uncover the rationale for the switch. On the supply side, we focus on political parties, analyzing to what extent their political offers align with citizens' demands. We locate all these dynamics within a typology of gender-based needs and demands, and also we focus on how much attention do national and international surveys pay to such demands. Our final purpose is to test the rationality of right-wing populist party voters in choosing these formations, and then to evaluate the likelihood of bringing them back to vote for other parties which are better aligned with European Union values and democratic values as well. And why are we doing this? Well, the destination democracy, where the UNTWIST project belongs, worries about the current fragility of democracy. In 2018, Wolfgang Merkel, in the policy review published by the European Commission entitled Past, Present and Future of Democracy, pointed out that the decline of mainstream parties and the simultaneous rise of right-wing populist parties was one of the most significant challenges confronted by Western democracies. And democracy is not less threatened now than it was a few years ago by the ever-rising electoral success of right-wing populist parties. As you can see in the chart, right-wing populist parties held a fair share of seats in many national parliaments in Europe in 2023. The rise of right-wing populist parties pose a challenge for liberal democracy due, among other things, to their authoritarian nativism and the reaction of gender equality policies. In this sense, it is worth noting that they're mainly voted by men. Nativism is usually analyzed in relation to immigration. However, we need to realize that right-wing populist parties' intense nativism keeps women at the center of the demographic nationalist programs. Women are the biological and cultural bodies that reproduce the nation, and therefore they must be controlled. We see examples of discourses and policy proposals aimed at exercising this control every day within the general illiberalism of right-wing populist parties. To summarize, where right-wing populist party governs, women's rights retreat. Therefore, in the UNTWIST project, we aim to promote gender equality as a core value of the European Union, defending it from the emerging threat that the oppositional gender rhetoric for right-wing populist parties represent. By developing policy recommendations that uphold gender equality as both a value and a way of life, our project aims to contribute to shaping the global future. In other words, we want to offer mainstream parties and civil society organizations policy recommendations to address the needs and demands of current right-wing populist party switcher voters in untwisted ways. That is aligned with the European Union and democratic values. Hopefully, to the extent that right-wing populist party voters are limited rationality voters, these improvements in the representation of their needs and demands will bring them back from right-wing populist parties. For the sake of clarity, before we advance, we want to define what we mean by right-wing populist parties. And we define these as political parties that combine right-wing ideology with populist rhetoric. This combination usually includes several of the following components in different amounts in different countries. So that is populism, nationalism, anti-immigration stances, focus on law and order, economic protectionism, opposition to liberalism, and in Europe also Euroscepticism. In the map, you can see the names of the parties that we analyzed within the countries in the UNTWIST consortium. So, what does the theory say about the electoral success of right-wing populist parties? Our project focuses on the theory of the losers of globalization, incorporating a gender lens. That is our added value. This theory poses that mainstream parties do not represent the needs and demands of those citizens who have been more negatively affected by the economic and cultural globalization. Therefore, by picking up, magnifying, and stabilizing those citizens' demands, right-wing populist parties have occupied an electoral space left unfulfilled by mainstream parties. In other words, this means that within current partisan competition, winners of globalization has aligned themselves with mainstream formations that support the continuity of the globalization process. In contrast, the losers would support radical parties skeptical of supranational integration, including right-wing populist parties. This literature has pointed out that right-wing populist parties attract voters from men negatively affected by globalization and economic and cultural trends. That is, capitalist modernization has negatively affected conservative sectors of the elderly and manual workers harmed by the industrialization, who has been interpreted as losers of globalization. However, the impact of the same socioeconomic variables on women has been less studied. In this respect, we bring gender into this theory by arguing that men and women have been affected differently by the processes of cultural and economic change associated with the globalization of the capitalist system, which generate dynamics and motivation specific to each gender in their voting decisions. Gender relation has been transformed in favor of relative egalitarianism, influenced by feminism and educational and labor policies that have facilitated the incorporation of women into the labor market. However, these changes may not have been perceived as positive by all sectors of the population. So some individuals, both men and women, may consider this transformation as damaging to their economic and cultural status. The perception of injustice in gender terms develops when certain sectors perceive a positional erosion of their status with respect to external groups, especially women or feminists, which generates feelings of resentful anger. In the case of men, this feeling could arise in two ways. First, by the threat posed by the successful incorporation of women into liberal and white-collar professions, challenging the traditional male dominance, and B, by the loss of male authority in the face of the transformation of patriarchy and the traditional family. These men will perceive feminism as a movement that erodes their identity and holds them responsible for gender inequality, which could mobilize them in support of right-wing populist parties whose anti-feminist discourses and promises to restore the previous social order would appeal to them. The threats that the processes of economic and cultural transformation have posed to women might be qualitatively different. In the economic dimension, those most negatively affected by the process of capitalist transformation are those with low levels of education and precarious jobs who face the stress of emancipation by having to reconcile work and family care tasks. These women, trapped between job insecurity and the domestic burden, could not feel represented by mainstream feminism, which emphasizes economic independence without adequately addressing care work. On the cultural dimension, those women who choose traditional roles as housewives may also feel upset, perceiving a social devaluation of their lifestyle. Both groups would reject the predominant egalitarian discourse of mainstream feminism and would find and align right-wing populist parties in the defense of their traditional positions. In other words, these male and female losers will act as limited rationality voters in choosing right-wing populist parties. Of course, these are hypotheses subject to testing in our project, and you will see some of our findings and conclusions afterwards. To conclude this presentation, all these testing and things are organized in three methodological phases. Each one produces robust empirical evidence upon we base our analysis and recommendations. We have already finished phase one and will present our general and context-specific findings recommendations in today's session, and you will also receive our briefings on that. We are currently in the middle of phase two and preparing for phase three, and I will talk about these two later in the second part of the session. And that will be all on my part. Thanks a lot, and I give the floor back to Laura.
Thank you so much, Antonia, for giving us an overall perspective on the project. Now, people, buckle up. After this sort of overarching perspective, we're now going into the specific machine room, if you want, of how we did this research. And you know, you will hear from 4 work package leaders on what specifically they've done. We have harnessed the entire toolbox of political science to get closer to these questions. There's a focus on methods and data, but most importantly, for you, the stakeholders in this room, all of the presentations then come down to what does this mean? What are the implications of this, right? As scientists, we burn for our research methods, but there's also a distinct political side to all of this and questions of implications. So bear with us. Bring all your questions into the chat if anything isn't clear. If you have, concerns from your own country, how is this covered? Write it all in the chat. We will have plenty of time to go into your specific questions and concerns in a moment. So, for presentations, I now invite Katja from Work Package 1 to get going. Katja, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm Katja, and I'm very in the happy position to represent my team from the University of Bern today, and to actually kick us off with the work package presentations. So our task as the first work package leaders was to develop a definition and typology of gender-based needs based on the academic literature, which would then inform the following work packages and to be able to testing the hypotheses of the project that Antonia just explained to us. So to do this, we preliminarily used a very broad definition of gender-based needs, which you can see here on the slide. And we use this definition to then collect our database for the development of the more evidence-based typology. You can see now you can see the final database here. So across all local teams, we collected a total of 406 publications published between 2007 and 2023. The data was collected by local country teams and was focused on finding all the different ways in which gender was discussed in the literature from both within the country as well as about the country. So we had a very specific focus on finding the local epistemic discussions about gender. And following this extensive data collection, we at the Uni of Bern then conducted a thematic qualitative analysis of all those articles with following two goals. First, to find an evidence-based definition and the main characteristics of gender-based needs, and then second, to derive patterns of these characteristics and expressions across our country context. So you can see here the main results for the first goal. We identified 6 core characteristics that emerged from the data essential when it came to the discussions of gender-based needs. And we then divided them into 3 broader aspects of gender-based needs, which resonated with our broader definition from before, which could help us answer the 3 questions of where do gender-based needs emerge, how are they approached by the literature, and what concrete demands are actually attached to them in terms of policies. Identifying how these dimensions are represented across our data. So going into the second goal, we found that gender-based needs are particularly emerging in these 6 central policy fields, which you can see listed here. And importantly, through our second dimension, we could also show that a focus on the policy area alone is not telling enough, actually, because gender-based needs vary a lot depending on the focus one puts in how gender is approached. So we found that you can actually get quite different results or different types of needs covered, depending on whether you look at how societal beliefs and values about gender are practiced, that would be the gender norms perspectives to take, or whether you look at observable material gender differences in terms of rights, access, or status, that we term material gender inequality, whether the focus is on the intersection of gender with other categories of discrimination, so an intersectionality focus, or on the expressions of feminism and anti-feminism. And lastly, for the demand, we found that across all of our literature, we could see a tendency towards more transformative rather than regulatory solutions to gender-based needs, which is not particularly surprising, maybe, since we actually looked at academic literature mostly. But it's interesting to keep in mind when then later looking at which policy solutions are advanced by policymakers. So when we take these patterns together and look across the countries, we got to the key typology, which you can also find in the policy briefing, where we identified 24 core types of gender-based needs by looking at the intersections between policy fields and the gender perspectives that I just explained. We also found in our data that 15 of those 24 types of gender-based needs are particularly salient across all of our country contexts. You can see this here in the numbers where it says out of 6, the number of countries in which we found this gender-based needs type to occur. So what this typology does is it serves as a toolkit or a map for policymakers to better understand which types of gender-based needs they have already covered. So for example, let's say a policy maker or a group of civil society advocates focuses on family policy. You can then select family as the policy theme, the policy field you're interested in, and you can then zoom into the data and explore how this has been approached from different angles and what gender-based needs have been found to be associated with it. So say, for example, you're interested in intersectionality, then the particular group could here simply quantitatively assess whether this intersection of family and intersectionality is already represented in their country context, but they could also go deeper and look at how exactly has this been discussed in the literature, and for example, find that family policy and intersectionality are particularly salient when combined with discrimination based on sexuality or class, let's say. And finally, they could also use our interactive tools that we created and that will be presented later by Vid to go directly to the literature reference and look at the literature and to see exactly how it's being discussed. The group could then go back to their own policies and programs to see whether they already represent this need or whether they might want to or be able to widen their approach to include it. So to sum up, we have several outputs and implications associated with Work Package 1. So first, for an academic audience, we have provided an extensive review of contemporary feminist thought, which bridges feminist theoretical camps and local epistemic communities through the focus on gender needs. Second, for the Untwist project, we have achieved our objective to derive a definition that informs the rest of the project and is present throughout Work Package 2 to 4, which we will hear about in a minute. And lastly, like I just presented, we have developed a toolbox which practitioners can use to review their or other existing gender policies and then better understand which gender-based needs are already covered and which have maybe been marginalized so far. So that's already it from our side. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Katja, for this to-the-point presentation. And again, there is a definite focus on implications and also stakeholder perspectives in each of the presentations. The invitation still stands. Write any questions that you might have to the data and the methods into the chat. And we now move on into the presentation of Work Package 2. Pablo and Daniel, please take it away.
Thank you, Laura. We are now presenting our findings from Work Package 2. UPO, Pablo de la Vida University, has led this package. Antonia Ruiz and Manuel González are the main responsible for the design. All partners have contributed with the data in their own countries. My name is Pablo Ortiz, and I'm the postdoc working at UPO together with my colleague, Daniel Romero. Well, the central question in our project is how to re-engage citizens who have moved from mainstream to right-wing populist parties. To achieve this, we first need to understand why they change their political preferences. That is, we have to examine their discourses, narratives, opinion, etc., to understand their rationality. So we want to test to what extent these switcher voters have moved from mainstream to right-wing populist parties because they thought that their needs and demands were disregarded or neglected by mainstream actors, and maybe better represented by right-wing populist parties. To test this, we used focus groups. This is a qualitative technique which involves a collective dialogue between several persons who didn't know each other. Specifically, we conducted 18 focus groups with an average of 7 participants per group. Our focus groups were carried out considering 2 variables: sex, with separate groups for men and women, and voting behavior. That is, selecting current voters of right-wing populist parties who have previously supported mainstream actors. In addition, other socio-demographic variables were taken into account for each of the countries. So moving into our findings, first, in general, participants seem to be quite moderate. This means that radical discourses regarding gender or immigration didn't emerge. Probably this is because we focused on switcher voters. However, this is a positive finding because it means these voters are more likely to come back to mainstream politics than if they were heavily radicalized. We also find that gender is not central in the discourses or when participants discuss their voting decision. However, many needs, concerns, and demands are gendered. That is, they are defined in different ways by men and women. So men and women have different perceptions and experiences about family, economy, welfare, etc., etc. We can observe that male and female switcher voters have different sex and gender-based needs and demands, which are also different for each of the national contexts. The implication for stakeholders is that these voters must be approached in ways that recognize gendered experiences without emphasizing ideology. For example, these graphs show the differences regarding the most important topics across countries. We can see how welfare is more central in Denmark and Switzerland, while, for example, security is most salient in the UK. Our policy recommendations will take these differences into account, as you will see later in the breakout rooms. And as I mentioned before, we observe different patterns of needs and demands for men and women. For example, in Germany, reproductive work is mostly discussed by women, while German men discuss the concept of economic crisis more than women. Anyway, we invite you to attend the local breakout rooms if you are interested in learning more about these specific findings after the break. And now I give the floor to my colleague, Daniel.
Great, thanks, Pablo. Other interesting finding from our focus group is that participants generally agree that there have been significant and positive advances in gender equality. Female participants particularly shared a positive evaluation of advances in women's rights. But at the same time, participants strongly criticized feminism. Furthermore, focus group participants, especially women, expressed feelings of emancipation fatigue. That is, they discussed the challenges of conciliating work and family. Considered with the previous key findings, first, the different gendered experiences by men and women, and second, the explicit rejection of further advancement in feminism and the expression of gender fatigue, this altogether implies that policymakers should address these needs in a way that resonates with both men and women, framing them as practical solutions to economic, family, and social challenges, instead of the frame of gender equality policies. Finally, participants allude to their frustration and discontent with mainstream politics, which they blame for their current situation. In other words, this switcher voters' rationale for voting seems to be more expressive than instrumental. This means that they want to punish the mainstream parties that they once supported, even though they do not expect that voting for right-wing populist parties will necessarily bring back a better past. In particular, female voters do not wish to return to a previous societal stage where they recognize that they had fewer rights than now. For the implication of this finding, it is key to understand that, according to scientific evidence, mainstream parties are currently represent the demands of the winners of globalization to a significantly larger extent than they represent the demand of losers. The implication is that this expressive voting has element of rationality, and it also means that the mainstream parties are part of the problem, but also part of the solution. As part of the problem, the mainstream parties' failure to address the concerns of vulnerable sectors weakens democracy. How? By eroding trust, exacerbating inequalities, and undermining fair representation. Meanwhile, right-wing populist parties exploit this gap. They offer distorted representation through illiberal ideology, and they threaten individual liberties and gender rights. But as part of the solution, strengthening mainstream parties' responsiveness to the needs of male and female losers of globalization would not only improve democratic quality, but also will reduce the appeal of right-wing populist parties among these voters. Our policy recommendations will help mainstream parties to reach this objective. That would be all for our side for Work Package 2, but you can learn more about specific findings of our focus groups in the breakout rooms.
Thank you so much, Daniel and Pablo. One of the unique selling points, if you want, within the broader, enormous increasing body of research on far-right and populist right-wing parties is the mixed methods approach here in our project, which is really quite unique because we have really run data across lots of different research approaches, and these focus groups are one of the few studies where political scientists actually speak with voters, and just ordinary voters, not political party members, but just people who have decided, I would like to vote for right-wing populist parties. That is something that we don't often see. And at the same time, we also utilize at a very advanced level survey data. So now we're moving into Work Package 3. Rosie, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Rosie Shorrocks. I'm based at the University of Manchester, and along with Louise Luxton, we've been leading on Work Package 3. So Work Package 3 looks at measuring attitudes towards gender-based needs in existing social surveys. So the premise behind this work package is that to understand and therefore represent citizens' gender-based needs, we need to know what these needs are. And surveys are widely used to provide measures of citizen attitudes, including towards gender-based needs. But the underlying idea behind the work package was that respondents can only provide answers to questions that they are actually asked. An accurate representation of attitudes towards gender-based needs requires accurate measurement in survey instruments. So in this work package, we first of all wanted to ask, well, what gender-based needs are actually represented in the questions that are used in large-scale social surveys at the international level across Europe, but also at the national level in our partner countries. So here we're interested in which gender-based needs are currently measured, which gender-based needs are missing, and also what are the dominant lenses through which measurement of gender-based needs in surveys are approached. And then the second part of the work package is to look at, do attitudes on these measures differ between right-wing populist party voters and other voters? So turning to that first question first, the graphs on this slide map survey questions in large-scale international social surveys. So for example, the European Social Survey, the European Value Study, the Eurobarometer, maps those questions to the gender concepts and policy themes developed through the typology in Work Package 1. So in a nutshell, what we find is that gender-related questions in these surveys are very narrowly concentrated in three main areas. So the largest share of questions were about quantifying discrimination based on sex, gender, and sexual orientation. So focusing on asking respondents where that discrimination occurs and to what extent it occurs. Second largest group of questions was attitudes towards appropriate gender roles in the family, such as men's and women's responsibilities for childcare. And often these questions are framed around a heteronormative and binary gender family model. And then the kind of third largest set of questions is attitudes towards men's and women's appropriate roles in the labour market, including measures to support working parents. And we saw similar patterns when we looked at the kind of national level surveys as well, but maybe you can talk a little bit more about that in the breakout rooms. So we also identified some limitations of the ways in which gender-based needs are currently asked about in social surveys. So some policy areas that we identified in Work Package 1 are just really completely missing from these questions. So one policy area that's missing is health, and this would actually include questions about attitudes towards reproductive rights, and these receive very little attention in these surveys. There's also a surprising lack of questions addressing attitudes towards feminism and gender-based movements. So, for example, there was only one question that we identified in the international surveys asking about feminism, and that's shown on the slide here. And also very few questions ask respondents to evaluate potential solutions to gendered problems. So turning to the second part of the work package then, this is looking at the attitudes of right-wing populist party voters compared to other voters. So here I'm focusing on results that we got from the international surveys. We also did some analysis with the national surveys, which might also come out in the breakout groups later. And what we did here is we chose questions that specifically spoke to the key themes that came out of the focus groups in Work Package 2. So these in particular were things around gender roles and norms of caregiving, the division of labour, work-life balance, women's participation in the labour market, but also attitudes towards homosexuality and gender identity, and attitudes towards securing gender equality, women's emancipation, and feminism. So the analysis that I'm going to talk about here is descriptive. There's going to be some more kind of sophisticated analysis later in the project using a survey that we've specifically designed, and I think Antonia is going to talk more about that later. As I've already kind of talked about, there are some limitations. So especially in international surveys, there's actually not a lot of overlap between questions about attitudes towards gender-based needs and questions asking about respondent party support, kind of making this comparison between different kinds of voters quite difficult. And as I've already noted, there's a lack of questions on some of the key themes that we identified from the focus groups. Having said that, our findings from the surveys largely support what we identified in the focus groups. So although right-wing populist party voters are a bit less supportive of women's labour market participation than other voters, the vast majority of them are still very supportive of women's inclusion in the workplace. They do, however, have stronger support for traditional gender roles in the home compared to other voters. So they're particularly supportive of women working in the home and doing childcare, and also especially emphasise men as the breadwinner. We also see large differences between right-wing populist party voters and other voters on attitudes towards homosexuality and towards LGBTQ+ people, which is what we'd expect based on previous research. And we also found, in line with the focus groups, that right-wing populist party voters largely agree that gender equality is good as a kind of abstract concept. They support gender equality, but they also exhibit strong resistance to feminist and LGBTQ+ advocacy. But having said that, again, there are some very limited questions around that. So we do have some implications from all of this. So actually using current public opinion data, it's quite difficult to assess voter gender-based needs, kind of as defined as through Work Package 1 and Work Package 2 of the project, and therefore whether these play a role in voter support for right-wing populist parties. There are gaps in measurement of key gender-based issues, especially things that are quite relevant to these questions, so such as attitudes towards reproductive rights or towards feminism as a movement. And there are also quite strong limitations in the way that these questions are framed. They often capture attitudes towards heteronormative or traditional family forms, but not other family arrangements, and they risk reinforcing stereotypes about traditional gender roles. And we do hope that the survey that has been conducted as part of the project will help to address some of these issues. And again, Antonia is going to talk more about that later. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to discussing all of this in more depth throughout the morning.
Thank you so much, Rosie. And we are really all very excited about the survey. And we hope to be able to kind of share some of that excitement with you, because it's really an innovative step towards a more evidence-based discussion of gender and right-wing voters. We have one more work package coming up for you. And this one is one, if you're interested in political parties and the way they express their particular positions and manifestos, then listen up now. Handing over to Giuseppe.
Thank you very much, Laura. Welcome, everyone. I'm Giuseppe Gattini, and a postdoctoral researcher at Sutherland University for Work Package 4. That's led by Daniela Brown. And today I'm going to present the results of our working package that are summarized in our briefing called the Party Priorities and Position on Gender-Related Issues. So The starting point, let's say, of our working package are very basic assumptions. Like gender equality is a key goal and a fundamental right of the European Union. And the other assumption is that political parties are fundamental actors of contemporary states and in particular liberal democracies. And bringing these two assumptions with the overarching question of the project, we asked ourselves how parties address gender-related issues. And what we found at the beginning of the project was that we actually don't know. Or better, we know, but we know not systematically. We don't have evidence that can be generalized. We have studies that have been dedicated to this party or that party in that specific context, in that specific period, but we don't have systematic evidence. So what we did was to collect 412 electoral manifestos, post-electoral, published after elections in national and European elections in the 6 countries of the project between 2003 and 2021. We developed a coding scheme based on the typology developed by the Bern team of Working Package 1, and then we trained 11 coders, political scientists, PhD students in political science, etc., that annotated, coded these party manifestos according to our scheme. And the key findings of these analyses is that overall gender-related issues are not that relevant in parties' manifestos, but with a lot of variation across countries and between the European and national manifestos. We see, for instance, that in Spain, on the average over the period, we have almost 7% of the content that is dedicated to gender-related issues. But what we have seen, apart from differences in the aggregate, is that also there has been variation over time. In 3 countries out of 6, we can see a pretty clear trend, positive trend. That means that salience and importance of gender-related issues has been increasing over time. Whereas in other 3 countries, we don't see such a pattern. Nonetheless, we didn't simply see the importance of gender-related issues in general, but also we divided, of course, the content of the manifestos according to topics. We annotated sentences about labor, about welfare, political and social representation, rights and discrimination, and finally, gender notions like patriarchy, feminism, etc., that are more general. And what we have seen is that there has been, over time, a shift in the topics discussed by parties on the average. For instance, what we have seen is that rights and discrimination that were not fundamental in at the beginning of the period analyzed, that they were occupying less than half of the space of the documents. At the end of the period, we see that on the average, they occupy almost half of the content dedicated to gender-related issues in the manifestos. Whereas we see that topics like labor and welfare that were to some extent more important at the beginning of this period have become less important over time. Apart from topic shifts, of course, our working package focuses also on one of the main focus points of the project, that is analyzing how right-wing populist parties address gender issues. And now you can see in this graph 2 different colors, orange and black. And when the bars are orange, it means that the mainstream parties or all the other parties that are not radical right parties dedicate more importance to that topic as compared to right-wing populist parties. And when it's black, is the contrary. Right-wing parties dedicate more space to these topics as compared to mainstream parties. And what we see is that essentially right-wing populist parties are those that dedicate most of their attention to rights, discrimination, and violence as compared to other parties. But what we find also is that on the average, the right-wing populist parties do not dedicate necessarily more space to gender in general as compared to other parties. Nonetheless, there is one exception, that is Vox in Spain, where the party that dedicates almost double space on the average as compared to, in their manifestos as compared to other parties. And what we see that essentially the negative framing of gender-related issues comes almost totally from these particular type of parties, so from right-wing populist parties, as you can see in the red part of the graph of the plot that you can see here. So the final evidence that we present in our briefing concerns how parties address gender-related issues in terms of whether they refer to these issues as goals to achieve, as issues to address, or whether they present concrete policies in order to address these issues. And what we find is that overall, in most of the countries, parties address these issues as general goals to achieve or issues to address in very general terms, but they do not provide concrete policies, even though in national manifestos, that means manifestos for national elections, tendentially parties delegate more space to policies. And what we see then, is when we look only at the policies, is that most of the policies are regulations. That means parties provide policies for regulating different sectors when they refer to gender, but they do not really provide, for instance, economic resources, or these are policies that represent the minority in most of the cases, with the exception probably only of Switzerland. So what are the conclusions and the policy implications that we draw from these evidence? First, the need for concrete policy proposals. Parties should, in our opinion, provide more evident, more concrete policy proposals rather than address these topics like just as general goals or general issues. And the second main point is that what we think is that parties should address more labor and wealth issues connected as compared to other topics, not because other topics are not important, but because simply and probably these topics are very fundamental for the life of people, for the balance, gender equality. They are still important, perhaps not as 60 years ago, but they are still very relevant to people. And this is it. If you want more evidence about what we did and about the German case, you can join our break rooms. And thanks for your attention.
The BID Foundation is a non-profit organization based in Girona and Barcelona, Spain. And we make complex information more clear and accessible through data visualizations. And this is what we do at the UNTWIST project to help researchers to communicate their results, their findings to other researchers, to the policymakers, to the stakeholders, and to the citizens. Nowadays, as you know, we have data everywhere, but it's often hard to explain it and in a way that helps you make decisions. Let me show you some examples of how we have worked so far on the UNTWIST project. After each team has worked on their work package, we start to find out the best way to show their data. We use the tool Observable. It's an open source tool, very used for the scientists for analyzing data, create dashboards and final reports to draw conclusions. This tool is open not only for the researchers, but also to a wider audience in case you want to explore it. And we have created what we call a notebook or interactive data sheet. So let's go to one of the notebooks of the Observable. Especially what are you seeing here is the notebook for the work package 3. We have the data for 5 work packages included in this tool so far. And what you are seeing here is the UK team, that the UK team is leading this work package 3 and this Observable. And they have already explained it very well what they have found out. So I'm going to show you how you can picture all their data. You can, as you know, this notebook contains data on how well gender-based needs are included in international and national open public service. So you can select here the international data or change here for the national data. You can select by countries. You can select also by themes. And if you hover here, if you pass your mouse over these bars, you can find the different data. Also, it allows you choose a country and a concept and see what happened. You can So explore by topic, by country, how deep the data is also. And the charts let you change all the data. You can explore here by different subcodes, by country, in national and international, and get the info in each of these bubbles. You can explore the data also, as you see, by themes, by policy themes and issues. And then you will find here in this notebook what we call a question finder, in this case for the surveys. And you can put a concept, or you can select also by country, and you will find here all the surveys that the team has analyzed, and also all the reference about the selected survey in this case. All of the data that you can see here, everything is downloadable, and you can also embed them or get them in a PNG or image format. Also, and very, very important, is that you, at the beginning of this notebook, you can find the code book, and you can jump to this here and see all the explanations about the hierarchy of about all the data. So this is one way to analyze the data. And if we jump again to the slides, let me show you another, another tool that we have already created. If you want more narrative, more visual, more storytelling experience, and is what we call a dynamic website, and this page allows you to explore the concepts, the methodologies, and the data used by the researchers too. And this kind of website is designed to help policymakers understand the results in a clear and effective way. Let's jump to one of these. Again, this is the dynamic web created by for the Work Package 3. And after an explanation about this kind of the data and the work that the team has already done, you can see here, in this case, the analysis of public opinion surveys from 2 decades in international and national as view. And then you can explore the gender concepts, and you'll find here definitions about what these kind of definitions means for the researchers, and how they work here with these 6 main themes. Okay, and then if you scroll down, you will find also the labels to explore with more detail each of these subcategories in each descriptions. Also, you will find key findings from international surveys that will help you to understand more the conclusions of this work. And then it's the moment that you can explore also the data. Again, clicking here by international data or national data and selecting here a country, and also you can select the different categories, and then you can find here all the data. Also, you can see the data in a timeline by the 2 decades that all this dynamic web data has. Finally, you will find here the conclusions and implications, and also it's time you will have here to explore the dataset link and go to the full report, and also the academic papers. For sure, all the dynamic webs have the contacts for the UNTWIST project consortium in case that you have any doubt or questions to do about this work. And that's all from our side, from the BID Foundation. We hope that you'll find these 2 tools very interesting to represent all the data that the researcher teams has already worked. Thank you very much.
And I am now handing over to Antonia again. Let me just, yeah, you still have slide control. All right, Antonia, over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Laura. And so I will now give some perspective about the project, what has been done, and what we'll be doing in the upcoming months. So our project started in 2023 and is planned to run for 6 years until the end of January 2026. Up to this point, we have been able to complete 7 work packages, producing around, excuse me, 2/3 of the deliverables foreseen for this project. All of them are empirical and working toward producing high-quality data comparable across countries. The quality of the work has been certified by external evaluators and the project officers from the European Commission. Based on this data and our analysis, we've been able to present you some findings and some preliminary recommendations. These are not yet strictly political recommendations. Those will only be developed at the end of the project when we have produced and analyzed of all our data. Our most important challenge in this project, however, is related to the proper dissemination and exploitation of these findings by our stakeholders, and particularly by political parties, policy institutions, and policymakers. Of course, civil society organizations are also key in these 2 processes of dissemination and exploitation. As scientists and academics, we sometimes struggle to effectively communicate our findings. Several reasons may limit our capacity, such as the use of technical jargon or formats that are not easily accessible for stakeholders or the general public. Our cautious way of expressing things, which might be mistaken by uncertainty of lack of confidence, or our fear of being misinterpreted by mass media or actors with their own specific agendas. Hopefully, we have been able to overcome some of these limitations, and your comments will help us improving our skills further. You're welcome to come back to us with other questions or suggestions on our briefs. So while we continue working on dissemination and exploitation of our current findings, there are other tasks developing until the end of the project that I will present briefly. So we are currently running the analysis of our survey data in Work Package 8, and we plan to have some conclusions by the end of 2025. Our analysis will profile male and female voters of right-wing populist parties in different domains and analyze different alternative explanations concerning voting behavior. At the same time, within Work Package 9, we are preparing citizen science workshops that will take place around April or May 2025. We will have citizens from different ideological orientations discussing the best way to answer the challenge that losers of globalization face. Our findings from Work Package 1 to 9 will constitute the core for developing our policy recommendation handbook. And that handbook will include also some recommendations on social media strategies for communication developed within Work Package 10. Good communication strategies might be as important as the implementation of policy recommendations in bringing switcher voters back from right-wing populist parties. And finally, we will perform a feasibility study before we release the final version of our policy recommendation handbook. Now, going a little bit on detail, we are really very proud of our survey because it reaches very high quality level, similar to studies such as the European Social Service Study or the Eurobarometer. It has been carried out by the same company responsible for those studies. Deusto University has coordinated the work as leader of Work Package 7. The study has been carried out exclusively with probability panels, allowing for 100% probability sampling in the 6 countries under study. This means our data represents perfectly the general population in this country. This is citizens 18 years and older. And we have set quotas by sex, age, education, and geographical location. We have run a pre-test with 100 interviews in each country to test the validity of the questionnaire across countries and made the needed adjustment before completing the study. Our questionnaire of 113 items cover many alternative hypotheses concerning political behavior and will allow us to test several alternative explanations of the reasons for voting right-wing populist parties. A distinctive and very interesting feature of our survey is the overrepresentation of right-wing populist party voters, particularly women, in countries with lower vote percentages. This secures us enough cases for sophisticated analysis in all of our countries. As I mentioned before, we are currently running those analyses within Work Package 8 led by UPO. In Work Package 9, the UNTWIST Consortium will engage in citizen science workshop to co-develop policy recommendations to improve political representation of the gender needs and demands expressed by switcher voters or right-wing populist parties in our focus groups and survey. The objective is to untwist the response those needs received from right-wing populist parties. In other words, to find ways to answer those needs and demands in new ways that are aligned with EU and democratic values as well as human rights. This is a very exciting experience for the academic partners in the consortium, since it is a new experience for most of us. We count with the invaluable expertise of the European Citizen Science Association, ECSA, as the leader of this Work Package 9 to guide and assist us. These citizen science workshops will be organized in each country, and they will be interactive discussion groups based on our previous findings from the focus groups and survey. Participants will discuss the kind of policy most likely or preferable to solve some of the specific challenges that losers of globalization face, what might be shared by different profiles. To find a set of policy options that fit within the ideological spectrum of different parties and are also as inclusive as possible, these groups will be mixed, including different political orientation and sexes. It is expected that we can invite stakeholders to also share and discuss some of these proposals with a few of the citizen science workshop participants. Also, we are all aware of the importance of that social media communication has acquired, particularly for younger generations. And we also know that part of the success of right-wing populist party messages is related to the use of mass media. Therefore, in Work Package 10, we try to find out what lessons can be learned from this and develop recommendations on how political parties can apply them to our policy recommendations. Led by Bern University, we will identify communication tools and strategies in the specialized literature on social media communication, and also hold a seminar with practitioners to advise us on how to apply these to our policy recommendations. This recommendation will be integrated into our policy recommendation handbook. So finally, the UNTWIST Policy Recommendation Handbook is our project single most important output. It will integrate all empirical and subsetting findings from Work Packages 1 to 10. Before this point, our findings for Work Package 8 to Work Package 10, which I alluded to before, will be shared as briefing, and further dissemination events will take place, and you're all kindly invited to join us and share your comments. So as I said, our findings based on the data analysis within the different work packages, citizen science workshop results, and the comments, suggestions, and contribution of our stakeholders will be all integrated into a policy recommendation handbook. And to make this an usable document for stakeholders, we will run a feasibility study in which we will consider the economic, social, and political cost of implementing our recommendations versus not implementing those policy recommendations. You can find more information on our webpage, including some local language documents that we will upload soon. You have links to the observable that Vid has just presented and access to deliverables, briefing, etc. Actually, briefings will be uploaded in a couple of weeks, but they will be there pretty soon. As I said, political parties, political institutions, policymakers, and civil society organizations are welcome to contact us to further elaborate on our data in valuable ways to inform their objectives and policies. And if you find any of this content interesting, please help us in contacting other stakeholders who might be interested in hearing about our findings and recommendations. It has been a pleasure to have you here today, and I give the floor back to Laura for closing the session.
Thank you very much, Antonia. People, we made it, and in time.